In 1970, a company you've probably never heard of filed a patent that made it illegal to save a seed. Read that again. A seed. The same seed your great-grandfather pulled off a dying tomato plant and dropped in his coat pocket every single fall since the Dust Bowl. That single piece of paperwork was the opening shot in a war on self-sufficiency that's been going on so quietly, most farmers alive today don't even know it started. And by the time we're done here, you're going to look at your own back 40 completely differently. Here's what's coming. 25 tricks your grandparents used to run a farm that fed a family through droughts, wars, and rationing without spending a dime they didn't have to. Some of these got buried by regulation. One of them got flat out outlawed in parts of the country. And at least one of them, sitting right there in your kitchen cabinet, could be doing more for your soil tonight than anything you bought at the co-op last spring. Stick around, because tip number 13 is the one that made the industry the most nervous, and I promise you'll never look at your bathroom cabinet the same way again. Think about what that actually adds up to over a full season. Free seed instead of a $20 packet every spring. Free fertilizer instead of a $40 bag every month. Free rooting hormone. Free pest control. Free irrigation that runs itself once it's buried. Individually, these look like pocket change. Stacked together across an entire growing season on real acreage, you're looking at hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars a year that used to just stay in the family instead of walking out the door to a supplier. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what state you're farming in. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the best tips in this video came straight from comments on the last one. Now let's get into it. Let's start with something growing in your driveway cracks right now. Weeds. And the fix has been sitting in your pantry the whole time. Acetic acid, plain old vinegar, tears weed leaves apart at the cellular level in a matter of hours. No mixing station, no protective suit, no waiting 3 days for it to be safe for your dog to walk across. The USDA's own research station in Beltsville ran the numbers on high-concentration vinegar and confirmed what old-timers already knew. It kills weeds cold, organically, at a fraction of what a jug of name-brand herbicide runs you. But here's the mistake almost everybody makes the first time they try this. Vinegar doesn't know the difference between a dandelion and your prized pepper plant. Spray it anywhere near your beds and you'll wipe out the good with the bad. This is a driveway and walkway tool, mixed 1 part vinegar to 2 parts water, applied on a blistering hot afternoon when the sun does half the work for you. Keep it off your growing soil completely. Simple rule, and it just saved you your first $20 of the day. But saving $20 on weed killer is nothing compared to what we're about to cover next, because this next one isn't about saving money. It's about a seed company betting you don't know the difference between what you're planting and what you think you're planting. Every spring, millions of American gardeners walk into a store, buy a packet of seeds, grow a beautiful crop, save seeds from it in the fall like their grandparents taught them, and plant those saved seeds the next year expecting the same result. And it doesn't come. The plants come back weak, stunted, nothing like what they paid for. Nobody tells them why. It's because those were F1 hybrid seeds, bred specifically so the next generation doesn't grow true to form. That's not an accident. That's the entire business model. Your grandmother never had this problem because she wasn't buying hybrids. She let 1 or 2 pole bean plants go to seed at the end of the season, dried the pods right on her kitchen windowsill, and stored them in old envelopes marked in pencil. Those beans were free every single spring for the rest of her life, and they got a little more suited to her exact patch of dirt every single year. Open-pollinated heirloom varieties are still out there, and once you switch, you never buy that seed again. That's not $5 saved on a packet. Multiply that across every crop on your land, every year for the rest of your farming life, and you start to understand exactly why this information isn't advertised. Now, saving the seed is only half the battle. The other half is getting a cutting to actually take root, and this next trick came straight out of the spice rack. Grandma didn't have rooting hormone from the garden center. She had honey and cinnamon, and it worked so well that modern growers are only now catching up to why. Dip a fresh cutting into raw honey, then straight into cinnamon powder before it goes into the soil. Honey feeds the cut end with natural sugars and enzymes that jumpstart root growth. Cinnamon is a legitimate natural antifungal. It seals the wound and kills off the exact pathogens that rot a cutting before it ever gets the chance to root. 2 kitchen ingredients doing the job of an entire bottle of synthetic rooting gel. The only warning here, don't overdo the honey or you'll be running an ant buffet by morning. A light dip, that's all it takes. Now, getting a cutting to root is one problem. Keeping a mature plant alive through a drought is a completely different fight. And this next method is the reason your grandfather's garden never wilted while everyone else's did. Most of us water from above, out of habit, because that's what the hose is built for. But surface watering trains roots to stay lazy and shallow, sitting right where the fungus lives. Your grandfather did something almost nobody does anymore. He'd sink a plastic pot or a bottle with holes drilled in it straight down next to the plant, angled so the water hit the root zone directly, underground, out of the sun. The roots had no choice but to chase that water down deep, building a root system tough enough to survive a drought that would kill a shallow-rooted plant in a week. This one technique alone can cut your watering by up to 70%, and it stops the fungal disease that shallow watering practically invites onto your leaves. It sounds almost too simple to work. It works. And speaking of things buried in the ground that outperform anything you can buy, wait until you hear what was sitting under the floor of a stove your whole life. The Amazon rainforest has some of the poorest natural soil on Earth, and yet ancient tribes there built something called terra preta, black earth so fertile it's still productive today, thousands of years later. Their secret was charcoal, plain, clean wood charcoal mixed straight into the dirt. That charcoal is riddled with microscopic pores that become permanent apartment buildings for beneficial microorganisms. It holds moisture without waterlogging your roots, and it fights off root rot naturally. Line the bottom of a heavy pot with charcoal instead of gravel, and you'll cut the weight nearly in half while getting better drainage. Today they call this biochar and sell it in small bags for a small fortune. Your grandfather scooped it straight out of a cold wood stove for free. One hard rule, though, never use charcoal from a barbecue grill. Briquettes are loaded with lighter fluid chemicals and salt that will kill a plant outright. Only clean wood charcoal, nothing else. Now here's a mistake almost every beginner makes without even realizing it's a mistake, and it's costing them half their growing space. We've all been trained to plant one seed per cell, spaced out perfectly, because that's what the seed packet tells us to do. But plants in nature never grew that way, and old-time growers figured out something the seed companies would rather you didn't. Drop 3 to 5 seeds into the same cell instead of one. As they sprout, instead of choking each other out, their roots actually push the stems apart naturally as they compete for light. You end up growing far more plants in a fraction of the space, and it works beautifully on root crops like beets, radishes, and onions. Wide spacing sells more trays and more bags of potting mix. Multi-sowing sells nothing, which might be exactly why you've never heard of it before today. Just don't try this trick on anything with a big fruit. Tomatoes, pumpkins, eggplant will only stunt each other fighting for room. Now, before we go any further, I want to show you what happens when one man decides none of these rules apply to him at all. In 1906, an Italian immigrant named Baldassare Forestier landed in the scorching heat of Fresno, California, and found land that everyone told him was worthless, hard-pan clay you couldn't farm on the surface. So he stopped trying to farm the surface. For the next 40 years, by hand, he dug down. He built an entire underground garden, sunken courtyards with skylights cut into the roof, where citrus trees grew protected from summer heat and winter frost at the same time. He created a self-sustaining underground ecosystem with nothing but a shovel and 4 decades of stubbornness, and it still stands in Fresno today as a monument to what one determined person can build when nobody's watching and nobody's stopping them. Try that today, and you'd be buried in permits before you broke ground. Geological engineers, zoning boards, water agencies ready to fine you the moment your digging touches the groundwater table. Forestier's garden is a reminder of what farming looked like before it needed a lawyer's permission. And that spirit of working with the earth instead of fighting it brings us to one of the oldest watering tricks still in existence, one that's over 4,000 years old and still beats most of what's sold in stores today. It's called an olla, the Spanish word for pot, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the smartest pieces of irrigation technology ever invented, and it has no moving parts. You bury an unglazed terracotta pot in the ground next to your plants, fill it with water, and the porous clay walls release moisture exactly when the surrounding soil needs it, and stop releasing it the moment the soil's had enough. No batteries, no timers, no app on your phone telling you what your soil already knows. Researchers at the University of New Mexico confirmed these buried pots cut water use by 50 to 70% compared to surface watering. That's not a rounding error, that's half your water bill, gone, for the price of a clay pot you can bury once and use for years. One critical detail: the pot has to be completely unglazed. A single shiny coat on that terracotta and the whole system stops working, because that glaze blocks the exact pores the water needs to pass through. Get that one detail wrong, and you've just buried an expensive paperweight. Stop and think about that for a second. Free seed, free root hormone, free irrigation, free fertile soil, and a doubled harvest, all from 8 tricks that were common knowledge 2 generations ago and are almost completely gone today. That's not because they stopped working. It's because a working, free solution doesn't sell anything to anybody. It doesn't need a subscription, a refill, or a yearly upgrade. The techniques that got remembered are the ones somebody could put a price tag on. The ones that got forgotten are the ones that couldn't. Keep that in the back of your mind for the rest of this list, because it only gets more obvious from here. If you're getting value out of these, now's the time to hit like and drop a comment with the one from this list you're trying first, because we've still got over half of these left, including the trick that got banned outright, and it's coming up in just a minute. Here's a trick so simple it sounds fake until you watch it work. After sowing seeds and watering them in, instead of leaving bare soil exposed to the sun, old-timers laid a board or a flat piece of cardboard directly over the top. It seems backwards, blocking light and air from seeds that are trying to sprout, but that cover traps moisture underneath, keeps the soil from drying out between waterings, and shields those defenseless seeds from birds and insects during the one stage of their life they can't protect themselves. The catch is you have to check under that board daily because it's just as good at hiding slugs as it is at hiding moisture. The second you spot a green sprout pushing up, pull the board immediately. Miss that window and you'll trade one problem for another. Now, the next tip on this list is the one I told you about at the start, and it's the one that made an entire industry deeply uncomfortable. Your family medicine cabinet had a plant medicine cabinet sitting right next to it, and nobody told you. Aspirin contains salicylic acid, the exact same hormone a plant naturally produces when it's under attack from disease or pests to trigger its own immune response. Dissolve 1 aspirin tablet in a gallon of water, spray it on the foliage, and you are handing that plant's immune system a running start before trouble even shows up. Back in the 50s and 60s, this practice got quietly discouraged right around the time chemical pesticide companies were fighting for market share. And it's stayed buried ever since, even though the USDA has since confirmed that salicylic acid compounds genuinely do activate a plant's natural defenses against fungus and bacteria. Growers using this report plants coming in up to 20% stronger and noticeably more disease resistant. One clear line here, though. This is a defense booster, not a substitute for actual soil health and consistent watering. Skip the basics and expect aspirin to fix it, and you'll be disappointed. Use it the way it was meant to be used, and you're giving your crop an edge almost nobody else is using. Speaking of things hiding in plain sight, the next one's growing on your windowsill right now. Aloe vera isn't just for sunburns. Inside that thick green leaf is a cocktail of natural hormones that trigger extremely rapid root cell division, which makes it one of the best rooting agents available, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Snap off a small piece of leaf, dip your cutting straight into the fresh gel, and plant it. That's the entire process. No bottle, no chemical growth regulator, and it comes with a bonus. Aloe strengthens the young plant's immune defenses right at the exact moment it's most vulnerable to rot and infection. Same warning as the honey, though. Apply it too heavily and leave the excess exposed, and you're inviting ants and fungus to the party. A thin coat does the job. Now here's a philosophy that's almost the opposite of how most of us were taught to garden, and it might be the hardest one on this list to actually follow. We check the weather app before we plant. Grandma checked the sky and she planted during the rain, sometimes right in the middle of a downpour, when every instinct says, wait for a sunny day. Turns out she was right and the instinct was wrong. Natural rainwater carries a nearly ideal pH, along with trace nitrogen pulled down by lightning, and it's about the most nutrient-rich water a young seed will ever touch. Planting during rain saves you hours of manual watering and doesn't drain a single gallon from your tank. The catch, and it's a real one, is that a genuine downpour can wash newly sown seeds clean out of unstable soil. So this only works in regions with a gentler, more predictable rainy season. Check your forecast, know your soil, and this becomes one of the lowest effort planting methods there is. Now, here's the one I promised you. Number 13, the trick that got quietly pushed out of use, the one an entire industry would rather you never try. Urine. Fresh urine carries nitrogen at a concentration close to many commercial fertilizers, along with usable phosphorus and potassium delivered in a form your plants can absorb almost immediately. For generations, farmers understood this was liquid gold and used it without a second thought. Then modern sanitation standards came along, treated it as taboo, and an entire free fertilizer source got buried under discomfort and regulation, even though the science backing it up never actually went away. Used correctly, it's safe, effective, and it costs you nothing. The method matters here. Dilute it at a 10-to-1 ratio with water, apply it directly at the base of the plant, never on the leaves, and do it early morning or late evening to cut down on both nitrogen loss and odor. It sounds strange the first time you hear it. It sounded completely normal to the generation that grew every bit of their own food. Get through the initial discomfort, and you've got a fertilizer source that never runs out. And speaking of things we quietly stopped doing because the rules got stricter, wait until you hear what your neighborhood used to look like during the war. By 1943, England alone had nearly 7,000 registered pig clubs, neighbors pooling kitchen scraps and vegetable waste to raise a single pig together in someone's backyard. That pig turned garbage into meat and turned meat production into free fertilizer for the whole street's garden beds. It was one of the most efficient, closed-loop food systems ever run at a neighborhood scale. And it happened because a war made self-sufficiency mandatory instead of optional. Try that today, and you're facing livestock permits and environmental health regulations that would shut the whole operation down before the first scrap hit the trough. We traded a circular system that fed entire neighborhoods for a landfill and a trash can. And most people don't even realize what got lost in that trade. The underlying lesson, turning waste into food and fertilizer, still applies even if the exact method doesn't fit modern rules anymore. Now, let's get back to something you can actually do in your yard this weekend, starting with your tomatoes. If your tomato leaves are turning yellow between the veins while the veins themselves stay green, that's not a disease, that's a magnesium deficiency, and your grandmother's fix was already sitting under the bathroom sink. Epsom salt is magnesium sulfate, plain and simple, and tomatoes are heavy feeders that pull magnesium out of the soil faster than almost anything else you're growing. Dissolve 1 tablespoon in about 1.5 gallons of water and apply it every 2 weeks. It costs pennies compared to a bag of specialty tomato fertilizer, promising the exact same fix at 10 times the price. One word of caution here, though. This addresses a specific deficiency, not a universal cure-all. So don't apply it blindly to plants that aren't showing that yellowing pattern between the veins. Diagnose first, then treat. Do that, and you'll see fuller fruit clusters and greener foliage within a couple of weeks. Now here's a spice that's doing double duty in nearly every kitchen in America, and almost nobody's using it in the garden. Turmeric's active ingredient, curcumin, is a genuinely powerful natural antifungal and antibacterial compound, and it makes an outstanding wound treatment for plants after you prune them. Dust a cut stem with turmeric powder instead of reaching for a synthetic fungicide, and you're sealing that wound against the exact soil pathogens waiting to rot it from the inside. Sprinkle a little around the base of the plant, and you'll find it also helps deter the ants that farm aphids onto your crops in the first place, protecting 2 problems at once. Mix it into potting soil directly, and it helps knock down the fungi responsible for root rot before it ever takes hold. It's cheap, it's already in your spice rack, and it's been doing this job quietly for generations, while pesticide companies sell you the same protection in a much more expensive bottle. If you're still with me, that tells me you actually care about doing this the right way. So make sure you're subscribed, because we've got 12 more of these coming, and the back half gets even better, starting with a plant most people rip out as a weed. Comfrey has a root system that drives straight down into subsoil most plants can't reach, pulling up minerals your topsoil ran out of years ago. Soak the leaves in a bucket of water, and they break down into a thick, dark, genuinely awful-smelling liquid that happens to be one of the best free sources of potassium you can put on a tomato or pepper plant. Potassium is what makes fruit grow bigger, firmer, and taste noticeably better. And the Royal Horticultural Society has recognized comfrey as one of the most effective natural fertilizers still in use today. Dilute that black concentrate 20-to-1 with clean water before applying. Plant 1 comfrey bush in a corner of your property, and you've built yourself a permanent, self-refilling fertilizer factory that never sends you a bill. Now, here's a technique from the exact same wartime era that solved 2 problems with 1 material you're probably throwing in the recycling bin right now. During the Dig for Victory campaign, spreading old newspaper between garden rows was standard practice. Cheap, effective, and available to literally everyone. Wet newsprint blocks sunlight from reaching weed seeds underneath, holds soil moisture through dry spells, and by the end of the season it breaks down completely and feeds organic matter straight back into your soil. Then, somewhere around the 1980s, garden centers started pushing landscape fabric and plastic mulch, materials that never break down and sit in a landfill for centuries, and we traded something free and biodegradable for something worse that we now had to pay for. Layer newspaper 4 to 5 sheets thick, soak it thoroughly, and weigh it down with a thin layer of grass clippings so it doesn't blow away on you. It's not glamorous. It works exactly as well as it did 80 years ago. And speaking of turning something you'd normally throw away into something valuable, here's what Grandma did with the weeds she just spent an hour pulling. Instead of tossing pulled weeds in the trash, drop them into a barrel of water and let them soak. As they break down, every nutrient they pulled out of your soil while they were alive gets released right back into that water, creating a dark, nitrogen-rich liquid fertilizer, essentially undoing the theft those weeds committed in the first place. Some local councils actually discouraged this back in the 90s over smell complaints, but researchers at Coventry University confirmed in 2019 that fertilizer made from soaked weeds delivers nitrogen levels on par with many commercial brands sitting on store shelves today. Dilute it 1 part weed tea to 10 parts clean water before applying to leafy greens. It smells rough. It costs nothing, and it closes a loop that most modern gardens leave wide open. Now here's a trick so simple you've probably got the materials in your recycling bin right now. Paper egg cartons make nearly perfect biodegradable seed starter trays. Fill each cell with compost, sow your seed, and when it's ready to go into the ground, you don't disturb the roots at all. You just tear off that individual cell and plant the whole thing directly in the soil. The cardboard breaks down within weeks and adds fiber back into your beds, and more importantly, it completely eliminates transplant shock, the #1 silent killer of young seedlings pulled roughly out of a plastic tray. Plastic trays crack within a couple seasons and end up as landfill waste anyway. Egg cartons are already free, already in your kitchen, and they disappear into the soil instead of piling up somewhere. Now here's your morning coffee doing a second job you never knew about. Used coffee grounds gradually lower soil pH, which makes them genuinely useful around acid-loving plants like blueberries, azaleas, and roses, and the coarse texture combined with residual caffeine helps deter slugs from crossing that barrier to reach your plants. Researchers at the University of Melbourne confirmed that composted coffee grounds meaningfully improve both soil structure and water retention over time. Sprinkling grounds around cruciferous vegetables adds a natural layer of pest resistance most people are paying good money to replicate with a store-bought product. It's completely free, it's already piling up in your trash can every single morning, and it connects your coffee habit directly to the health of your soil in a way most people never think twice about. Now let's talk about the tool sitting in your shed that you've been told is essential and might actually be working against you. Your grandmother never tilled her soil, decades before anyone in the modern gardening world started calling no-dig a movement. She understood something that took the rest of the industry generations to catch up to. Turning soil apart destroys the underground fungal network and the earthworm tunnels that keep it alive and breathing. Instead, she simply layered compost on top of the soil and let the earthworms pull those nutrients down naturally, doing in weeks what a tiller does in one violent afternoon. Modern research has confirmed that disturbing soil releases carbon into the air and damages the exact microbial ecosystem your plants depend on. No-dig gardening holds moisture better, matches or beats tilled yields, and takes a fraction of the physical labor a tiller demands every single season. Think about what that means for your back, your fuel bill, and your Saturday mornings. One less pass with a machine that costs money to run and maintenance to keep alive. Stop breaking up their home, and the earthworms build you the most fertile soil you'll ever grow in, for free, every single season, without you lifting a shovel. Now here's a free material sitting under every pine tree in America that solves one of the most hated chores in gardening. Fallen pine needles form a dense physical barrier that blocks sunlight from ever reaching weed seeds buried underneath. And without light, those seeds simply never sprout. That alone saves you hours of hand pulling every single week. As the needles slowly break down, they add organic matter back into your soil and bring a mild acidity that acid-loving plants like strawberries and roses genuinely thrive on. It's a free resource most people are literally raking up and throwing away instead of using. Now here's a small design detail almost nobody thinks about that determines whether your seedlings survive their first transplant or not. Straight-walled seed cups look identical to sloped ones sitting on a store shelf, but they behave completely differently the moment you try to remove a seedling. A straight cup traps the root ball and forces you to pry it out, tearing delicate young roots in the process almost every time. A slightly tapered cup lets the entire root ball slide out clean and intact with one gentle squeeze. That one design choice determines whether your seedling spends its first week in the ground healing from damage or growing straight into new soil without missing a beat. It's a small detail. It's also the difference between a strong transplant and a stunted one. And finally, let's put two of these old habits together into the single most efficient weeding system your grandparents ever ran. Because this is the one that turns your worst chore into free fertilizer without a single extra trip to the compost pile. Pull weeds during the hottest part of the afternoon, then instead of hauling them to a bin, just leave them lying right there on the surface of your bed. That midday heat cooks the roots dead within hours so they can't resprout, and by the next week they've broken down right where they fell, feeding the exact soil they were just stealing from. Pair that with wood chips down your garden paths, material tree trimmers will usually give away for free, and after a year or two of weather and foot traffic, that path breaks down into some of the richest mulch you'll ever shovel onto a bed. Replace it with a fresh layer, and the cycle starts right over again. One chore, 2 free resources, 0 trips to the garden center, 25 tricks. Every single one of them kept a family fed for a fraction of what it costs today. And every single one of them still works exactly the same way right now, this season, on your land. None of this is nostalgia. It's a working set of instructions that got quietly pushed out of common knowledge because nobody profits when you learn how to feed yourself for free. Your grandparents didn't have a bigger budget than you. They had better information, passed hand to hand, season to season, and at some point that chain got broken. Today, right here, you just picked it back up. You don't need to run all 25 at once, and honestly, trying to do that in one weekend is how people burn out and quit before the first seed even sprouts. Pick 2, maybe 3, and try them on one bed this season. Watch what happens to your soil, your water bill, and your yield by the end of summer. Then add 2 more next season. That's how a whole farm gets rebuilt, one proven trick at a time, not all at once. If your grandparents' garden ever fed your family through a hard year, a drought, a layoff, a war, tell that story in the comments below. Somebody scrolling through this thread tonight is closer to losing their own garden than they're letting on, and your story might be exactly what gets them back outside tomorrow morning. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Share this with the person in your family still buying what their grandparents used to grow for free, and I'll see you in the next video.